Well, hello, creatives, community, kind folks, and kitty cats yet again. Welcome to RPG with TV with DBJ. As we go about our hour or so, demi-daily deep dives into a particular subject. For those who yeah, thanks, Rickard. And actually managed to be able to catch the stream for the first 2 to 3 minutes. Yeah, this is just the preamble. So, for those who don't know, each day is a different topic amongst a theme that runs the whole week. So, this whole week, we're talking about weather, maelstroms, a little bit of chaos, and celestial events that happen. Combining them with our real world and putting them into our tabletop RPG games. And then each day we have a different subject, like Monster Monday, and today is Tips and Tricks Tuesday, World Building Wednesday, Third Pillar Thursday, Future Friday. All right, so today on Tips and Tricks Tuesday, I thought we'd get a little meta, and I believe the title is Managing the Maelstrom. um, yeah, managing Maelstrom is just as easy as herding cats. Yes, and I thought we'd get a little meta and talk about managing our setting, our world, in terms of things from just creating our setting when you have a lot of moving parts, all the way down to handling, I don't know, like BFF monsters in the middle of combat when you have a bunch of players and they're all trying to do their own things. Um, it's for basically us just spitballing some ideas to keep track of a lot of moving parts when you're just one individual. You're like one DM, just one GM or storyteller or what have you. When you have not only your players who are essentially the chaos points, the center of chaos, because you never know what they're going to do exactly. And you also have a world where you, I'm sure you want to make it as organic as possible. And you have events happening in the background that maybe the players will never know about. And how do how do you handle those little aspects and moving pieces and NPCs and players throwing the monkey wrench into the plans of your big bad evil guy, and how does that happen? So I thought we get a little meta in terms of that, and yes, we can combine this with the the idea of the maelstrom itself. Maybe we will focus it around the idea that this world that we've kind of been half creating before World Building Wednesday is something that is thrown into chaos itself. So let's go really big before we start to zero in and talk about creating a setting that has a lot of moving parts to it. So keeping with the theme of the maelstrom of storms and such, let's say you have, let's do a handful. Let's say you have 5 kingdoms, each with their own machinations, right? Maybe there's one kingdom that is surviving by a mere thread, and they're just holding on because they don't have very many resources, and they have, let's say they have spies or something, or agents going out to steal things necessary to keep that kingdom alive. And then maybe there's a second kingdom that is well protected, but maybe they're xenophobic, and only with very little connection to the outside world do they start to change, and maybe they're just very paranoid about having their particular resources stolen, and so on and so forth, right? Maybe there's uh, coastal kingdoms being battered by storms, and northern kingdoms completely entrapped by, they just never know. Maybe they're really good survivors, but it's always an act of rebuilding. And so keeping track of all that, PCs go north, what happens to the kingdom in the south? PCs go west, what happens to the kingdom in the east? PCs ignore a couple of plot threads you dropped before them, and big bad evil guy's plans continue? How do you juggle all of that? So let me get to chat. Ricker says, and that's my cue. Time for me to move. Looking forward to catching the video on demand. I wish you a great digital pizza talk, great abundance of squirrels. That's all right, man. Hey, I'm gonna have to get a stuffed squirrel. I'm gonna have to put a stuffed squirrel, maybe put a little tray, have it behind me, little button on it or something. So that's quite all right. Okay, so you have a game world, you have a lot of moving pieces, and you really want things to move forward. Now, I believe even Gary Gygax even suggested about having a calendar of events happen. Calling you now, Patreon goal enough to buy a stuffed squirrel. Yeah. 13 American dollars, and yes, we can have a stuffed squirrel on the show. Or I could get a cat costume and stuff my cat into the squirrel costume. That would be cool. All right. So I'm not sure. I believe if you are someone who loves a lot of detail, having a calendar, even a calendar that's been modified for your world. Calendar doesn't need to have 30 days. It doesn't need to have 24-hour days and things. Maybe you have a 5-day week and 687 days in the year, whatever, it doesn't matter. But if you have your own calendar for your own world, you could, check mark off these events happening at this time. Assassinations, floods, massive fire in a city, celebrations, spies captured and executed in the town square. Like, you could make some simple bullet points. And so my feeling is, I wouldn't, to make things easy so that you're not literally controlling a living world, such as controlling billions of people in your world, I would suggest using no more than bullet points and having things happen maybe seasonally or monthly or weekly outside of the PC's zone of influence. Especially if you want your world to have consequences. Do the PCs go north or south? If they go north, everything in the south is forgotten or happens without their interaction and so forth. But what you want to do is just have, I would suggest just having a number of bullet points. Maybe pick an electronic document or a notebook or 3x5 cards, and just check mark off some of the events that you would like to have happen in your world, irregardless of the players. And then when the players get involved, maybe it throws only that particular part of the world into chaos. There's an assassination of a royal council of 7, and they are killed. PCs instead decide to go to that particular location. One or more of them are given clues as to a possible assassination. They stop the assassination attempt happening. The Council of 7 scatters to the 4 corners of the earth. So now, of course, that doesn't happen. And then now that starts to change. Maybe that has ramifications for the rest of your world. And so if you only have a few bullet points, you really don't have the assassination to happen now. Is thrown into turmoil, and they are now sending agents after the PCs themselves. Well, that's pretty easy. You used to have a bullet point about the assassination. Now they've changed their focus. Now the other thing that you want to beware of is not to overload the choices for your players, because to an extent, you don't want to apply the same amount of importance to every single event in your world, especially if it's going to be sandboxy. Here's what I mean. When you go into a restaurant, many restaurants will have a menu with only so many items on it. And ideally, a lot of menus for restaurants, they try to make the menus as simplified as possible. And the reason for that is, despite the fact that some restaurants actually have things that are not on the menu at all. And the reason for that is because too many options causes analysis paralysis. It's the I'm going to this restaurant and there's so many choices that I feel like I'm missing out on too much. And you never want to go into a place of a business and feel like you're missing out on something. Let me give some examples, right? Players are in the center of your world and they can go north, south, southeast, or west. And you give these excellently portrayed, interesting things for them to do in all four directions, right? So the players are like, okay, we've got 4 decision points to make. And then when they pick a direction, then you start saying, okay, you're going north. Well, up north, there's like 6 other things that could be happening. There's rumors of a white dragon. There are cloud giants that some people feeling are have taken over a mountain habitat, and there's also a winter tribe up there that's rampaging and stuff. And so after a while, the players are just like, okay, wait a minute. We choose to go up north. There's like 6 things up here. If we go east, are we going to run into like 7 things happening? And are there like 12 things happening in the south? And after a while, it's like it may make them feel inadequate to handle everything in the world. So a good rule of thumb is to basically describe the things you want your players to poke, right? Don't go too deep into doing the, oh, by the way, there's also, and oh, by the way, there's also this other thing, and oh, by the way, because sometimes there's just too many clues, right? A detective at a crime scene is looking for clues, but do they really need to know that, do they need to be distracted by a car parked illegally and a sewer system that's flooded and a dog that just barks and barks too much and the neighbor doesn't like it? And sometimes you need the players to focus down on one thing, especially if there's too many red herrings. And there's nothing wrong with red herrings at all, but you don't want to lead them by the nose with like an overabundance of red herrings when you really wanted them to go north and go after the white dragon, right? On one hand, you're like, I don't want to railroad my players, but on the other hand, it's like, yeah, don't describe the interesting thing with description. The other stuff, let's leave it in the background. Let rumors of the white dragon rampaging up in the north be the big thing, and then, oh, by the way, there are refugees running from the white dragon, and there's a cult that might be into these like giants. Some may even call them storm giants, but you're not sure. But they might help, and then like frame things in terms of this is looking behind the scenes. This is kind of a way to manipulate your players into doing what you want them to do. I know this is kind of wrong for me to say that, but it's like if you frame things in a manner of, like, for example, oh, your player character is from the north. Maybe you're like a northern barbarian or something. And you can frame things in terms of, oh, your player character, of the white dragon that has been rampaging this place, or that has awakened after an ancient ritual or something. Like you could frame things in the sense of yes, you as a player character, this already. And I'm giving you this knowledge so that you hold on to it, so that it becomes an important aspect of your character, as opposed to the players being divorced from the sandbox itself. And in that way, that might motivate your players to go in a particular direction that you've prepared, as opposed to trying to hide, let's say, the ravaging of the white dragon amongst a bunch of other clues that you haven't quite prepared yet. Okay, so let's maybe that was a little bit too wordy for something I was trying to be simple, but basically bullet points so that, and if you need to edit them, you don't have to spend too much time going back and changing things, and maybe a very minimal calendar. Either doing it seasonally or monthly, and just going, oh, that's right, in the South. That way, if you forget to move the pieces on your gaming world, it's not too much trouble to go through your bullet points and go, oh, that's right, the assassination of the noble council, forgot about that. And then you can drop that clue on the player's lap if they come into another location. Now, one thing that's a trope that's actually very useful, although people don't imagine it so, and that's the idea of the tavern. And in Dungeons and Dragons, there's the trope of the PCs going to the tavern. But if you look at it very generally, a tavern in Dungeons and Dragons is really just a social meeting ground and a microcosm of the world in which that tavern exists. And so it doesn't have to be a tavern exactly. It can just be a social gathering place, and that's where the rumors spread, and that's basically becomes the microcosm of what's going on in that part of the world. Hey, Vince, what's going on? Plura says, I love my calendar, though it's usually only a few days forward, especially important for festivals and so on, for world building and slowing the pace. Exactly. And again, I like what you said, Plura, about slowing the pace. It's not necessary that you have to keep your foot on the gas and like, okay, keep going, guys, keep going, like pushing your players forward. But it is a way for you to use a calendar to say, like you're saying, festivals, weather events, maybe just little bits of chaos, a village catching on fire for whatever reason by an accident, or a rock slide, stops a mountain valley pass for people traveling back and forth through that pass. Maybe there's a festival coming to town and there are people protesting it, or scouts from the scouts in the head of a marching order for a vast army come back with information about their enemies or something. The classic half-starved, half-injured individual that stumbles into a tavern after a certain amount of time. The town crier that has information, that stands upon a soapbox and tells people what's going on in the city after, reading proclamations or something, or changing of the guard. Maybe there's the PCs are in a location where however the place is being ruled or governmentally ruled, that there's a changing of the guard. Maybe it's noble and there's a new birth of a child, or a king steps down and puts their second daughter in charge or something, whatever. So you could have those things in little check marks and have things happening. And if you use an air quote tavern, you can do this. And again, I hear you, Vince. Yeah, the squirrel's hanging around somewhere right behind the monitor. So instead of a tavern, you can use anything from tea houses to the local docks to the town fountain square to a message board or theater, or any place where people gather for whatever reason. Maybe people are waiting for the next supplies to come through the mountain pass, and people were there handling, taking fruits and veggies and pelts and raw materials and such. And oh, by the way, yeah, so those kind of things. Yeah, we're just talking about handling the maelstrom of your setting, handling the chaos of like a sandbox, essentially. Maybe I should have put that in the title. And using like calendars and things like that. So if you want your players are running around your sandbox and they go to different locations, maybe in the southern desert region, there's an oasis, and travelers are there, getting their pack animals watered and fed and brushed down and such. And so that becomes your air quote tavern as to rumors and keeping the players up to what's going on. If they've just gone back down south after traveling around the Arctic North and they're going down south there in this, desert region or something, maybe the people start talking about, I don't know, the Sultan that's taken over and killed his 3 wives, or the war that's happening, down in the southern region of something and something, and they've been at war for 3 weeks or whatever, while the PCs were up north, and so this is a great way to drop some little nuggets and things. Yeah. Dead man's the storyteller says, call it a dust storm instead of a maelstrom. Yeah. Vince says, I personally would only simulate the juicy stuff, so politics, catastrophes, etc. And again, manipulating, using a light hand and manipulating kind of where you want your players to go. Basically making the exciting parts the places you want your players to touch, and leaving some of the red herrings or some of the unfilled portions behind the prop and setting that hasn't been filled yet, make that a little bit more boring, so that the players really want to latch onto the exciting stuff, instead of you going, oh, and down in the desert part, there's an Ifrit that's has a legion of fiends or something behind it, and the players are like, great, we'll go there, and you're like, oh, that was just supposed to be a rumor, I didn't prepare that yet. It's like, yeah, you might not want to mention that as a huge point if you haven't done that. Vince says, how the major players of the world interact with each other like they do in Stars Without Number. I don't have or own Stars Without Number, but I hear that it has a pretty robust, like, randomization tables and such to push the politics and catastrophes and other machinations in your world forward when your PCs have turned their backs to it or haven't interacted with it yet. And this is also a great way to go backwards with player interaction in your world. Vince says Stars Without Number is a free PDF. Yeah, I don't know why I don't have it. Maybe I'll have to go order it now. But one other thing is you can also offer information about PC's actions backwards. And what I mean by backwards is, let's using the example before of them going north and then eventually going south, you could also drop little nuggets of the ramifications of what they've done after they've gone up north. So they went up north, they slew the white dragon, they liberated the people, they decided to go south. You could drop little nuggets of, I don't know, maybe some random religion starts to spring up around one of the characters up north, or the place is left in ruins because there is no political leadership and they are desperately looking for someone to take over, or whatever, or the people are grateful, and you hear stories of a song being written or a ballad being written about the PCs that's starting to spread, right? So along with information given to the players as they go forward, you can also start to sprinkle in some information from their actions that they previously took, so that it's starting to affect the world. And again, if you're not writing a dissertation on your entire world, you can go back in, go after the bullet points, start to erase certain things. Oh, White Dragon's dead, erase that. PCs are now looked at as heroes and icons of personality or something. Maybe people become, a cult of personality starts to grow up around them. Now you can write that into your bullet points and go on that way. And also this definitely will make the PCs feel like they own the world, like they're part of the world, like they're having an impact, especially when the consequences of their actions starts to spread. Now, some players like to just throw monkey wrenches and everything and laugh as they do it. The PC that wants to set fire to the tavern, the PC that wants to pee in the corner while they're talking to a great king or something. Some players are just like, they balk at the idea of having consequences in the first place, or they just love, they're like chaos incarnate sometimes, and incorporating consequences into your world, especially if they're not used to it, might throw them off a little bit, but I would suggest getting in the habit of having consequences as well. Vince says, how much would you guys invest in a sandbox game between sessions? I think it's an important question when you plan what to simulate and what not. The faction turn of Stars Without Number can take up to 1 hour of lonely fun for the GM, where they plot different factions against one another. And that of course is the thing where, you know, if you feel like you're a little bit overwhelmed, like, oh man, I made this giant, you know, basically this giant ass world, and I can't move all the parts. I've got 12 nations and 72 different leaders, and I've got, you know, 14 different factions, and each one of them has, you know, machinations happening internally and externally. You know what? You could just parcel a lot of that stuff off to your players too, especially if the players are part of that faction. So that, like, let's say you have a player who's like an assassin, and maybe there are a number of factions that are hiding in the shadows or something. Recruit some of your players to handle some of that crap. You know, ask them, you know what, this faction of the Bladed Jade, what would they do now that their leader is gone? Or what would you do with the you know, the Ebony Sabers or something? Like knowing that the Bladed Jade's leader is dead and gone, would they move into that territory, or would they sit back and wonder what would happen and let the chaos ensue? You know, recruit some of your players to think about that kind of stuff. And as a side effect of them helping you move your world and the pieces in your world, you can also, you know, just let the meta knowledge rest where it is, instead of forcing them to go, well, you really don't know what's going on. Let the assassin character, you know, have that information fall into their lap. Oh, by the way, I know the Bladed Jades and the Ebony Sabers are at each other's throats, or I know there's been a regime change because, I don't know, an orphan kid dropped a note in my hand when I went into town or something like that, right? You could always reshape those things as well. Plur says, anything they don't see is wasted, so I focus on what they see. The best backstory or political intrigue won't make your game better unless it comes to the table. You know what? If that ain't the most practical knowledge as well, like, some of us world builders tend to get so deep into our own world, we kind of forget that it doesn't matter unless the players see it, they interact with it, it happens in front of their face, and we can get too caught up with that. It's almost the equivalent of the player that has the backstory that's so deep that no one ever actually interacts with it, and then it doesn't matter anymore. Like, we've all seen movies where the people who created the movie are like, you know, after the movie, you see the movie and you're like, man, that movie sucked. It was terrible. And then you hear about the background information about the movie and you're like, wait, you put all that information, you did all that study in the movie, but you didn't reveal it. I know I'm squirreling here, but for example, in the DC movies, the new Joker with the metal teeth and the tattoos and stuff, Jared Leto's new Joker, they stated that Batman actually knocked his teeth out, and that's why he had those metal teeth. Okay. We never knew that in the movie, so it didn't matter, despite the fact of how cool it is that Batman knocked his teeth out. It's like, wait, you didn't, but you never told anyone in the movie. You didn't hint towards it. I mean, sure, you could infer maybe, but it's so. I definitely agree that when you start having these gears turning in the background of your world, to have them to put them as close in front of the PC's vision and not so far away from their peripheral that they never know what's happening. And then 3 months later in the playing sessions and 37 sessions later, you go, hey, you didn't notice that something was happening in the West. And the players are like, well, why would we know? We never went there. None of our players has a connection there. You didn't leave any clues that something was happening in the West. And now you're telling us the big bad evil guy took over the Western region and we could have stopped it. It's like, yeah, you really need to put some of those things forward in front of the players. And as a matter of fact, we joke, we kind of talk about this difference between railroad and sandbox. But once the players start moving in a sandbox, technically they start to railroad themselves. Oh, we want fame and fortune. Okay, well that's the fame and fortune railroad, right? Oh, we want to become political leaders and take over land. Well, now you're going down, the PCs are choosing to go down that railroad. So yeah. Going back to the chat, Vince says, "Ooh, excuse me." Let me go back up. Okay, so Vince says, I think I would primarily emulate what is near the PCs. That would also be that would also be fun in quote, what would your nation do in this situation? Exactly. Especially with the PCs, if you hand that information and those duties over to your players, even between sessions, and then hand that information over to them, take their notes, and then let that PC be the perpetrator of that information to the other players in the group as well. Vince goes on to say, it is the nature of sandboxes that your players will never ever see all of it. That's true as well, especially if you have a very large like continent or nation, a lot of factions, far more than the classic triangle. If it's bigger than a triangle, it might be hard for them to handle it all. And yeah, then you get yourself a little bit of problems for yourself handling all the moving parts. Pillar says, no, of course not, but it's about likelihood. Doing something cool on the far end of the world won't do anything. Exactly. Unless the point is to lead them that direction and kind of lead them by the nose, like, oh, this cool thing is happening 600 miles away and you're walking on foot. What are you going to do about it? And then as they get closer to it, things start to happen. Vince says, that's true. You can do that occasionally if it has an impact on the other side of the world or one PC from that place. But generally, you should focus on nearby stuff. Yeah. Yeah, Plura says, maybe I should have said what they can see rather than will. You're fine. Yeah, we get it. I absolutely agree with you. I definitely agree with you. Maybe we should make a T-shirt that says that. Vince says, in the Far Verona campaign, yeah, I'm familiar with Far Verona. They did a couple of extra miles and made a universe simulated by Patreon supporters. Oh yeah, hundreds of them. I joined for a while. It was messy fun. I played in a game with in a Phase Rip Marvel Universe game with the Nerdarchy guys, and they did the same thing where the people in the chat played innocent bystanders in our Marvel Universe superhero game, and the chat were like security guards and innocent bystanders. I believe at one point the chat played rabid dogs in a back alleyway or something, and they were hilariously fun. It was pretty cool. I think they even played orphan kids at a group home or something like that at one point, and engaged in all kinds of strange things. Some of it hilarious, some of it pretty poignant, as a matter of fact. Undo says, it depends. It matters to me as a DM because I want to know the answer. If you like consistency, you need to know the answers because improvising may hurt that consistency. Well, I agree, but maybe I'd come at this from a different point of view. So let me read Vince's follow-up. I think that largely is up to your GM style. Some like keeping things open. Others like having perfect consistency. I would say that to tack on to what Undo says about it depends. I want to know the answer. I think it depends. It's more about the motivation of your world, right? And I know it sounds strange to have a world that has a personality, but factions, people, economic things, political things, they all have a personality to them. They have a motivation. They have a direction they want to go. There may be a country that's leading towards war. And so it would be consistent, even though you may not know the answer, if the PCs get involved in something, you know that this country is leading towards war, right? And unless something gets in the way of that or disrupts that, they go bankrupt. There is a great weather event that prevents their armies from marching. There's usurpers come in and throw a monkey wrench into who's leading the armies. You know that they want to lead towards war, so it would be consistent for them to kind of theoretically march towards that. So I'm just saying, like, if you in your larger setting, if you understand what they want, their wants and needs, maybe even some of their fears and desires, you can be pretty consistent, because remember, your players are they're the chaos in your organized world, and letting them screw up the gears is kind of the point. And so, yeah, if they're going to do something and the PCs get involved in it, okay, well, maybe they change their mindset a little bit, and instead of going to war, they want to go to war on the PCs, that kind of thing. So yeah, I definitely agree. Vincent says, in the Far Verona, you actually made the faction turn for your faction. You had to find out how to decide what to do with all others in the faction. Every faction had their own Discord channel. Oh wow, I didn't know it went that deep. I'm trying to remember. I didn't watch it intently. I don't get to watch a lot of things. I actually have to hear it. So maybe it played in the background and such. Vince says, I was in the strict Germany-inspired faction. I played diplomat with another faction, but after a while, it became impossible to follow all the news, so I stopped. Yeah, and that can be a little bit, again, depending on how much info dumping you're doing on your players, it can get a little bit out of hand. So again, letting the players maybe control some of that, taking the turns on which factions are doing what, would really lend to taking some of the stress off your back. Now, to add to to add to what Undo was saying about, like, as a GM, like, I want the answers to things. It's if you're going to leave some of that information in the players' hands, of course, in the beginning, you're not going to know what the hell the players are going to do. But some players are actually quite consistent in the things that they want to see happen, right? Even the player that's the monkey wrench player, the player that loves chaos, is consistent, because they're going to consistently go towards chaos, right? So that might be a thing too, where in the beginning you're just like holding on the seat of your pants, like, please don't screw up my setting, and you get your notes back and you're like, oh, good. Whew, I thought they were going to burn everything down. All right, and then use their little bullet points and such, and then move your world forward. Pelora says, I've always wanted to finish a perfectly normal session with the apocalypse. Like, well, you should have gone left instead of right in the first cave, and maybe you could have stopped all this. I won't. I'm not an idiot. Yeah, but that is the thing too. I mean, we've all taken part in some intellectual properties where they do a left turn like that, and you're just like, that came out of nowhere. That makes zero sense. Right? I mean, we've all seen that before, where you're just like, that doesn't. Wait, there was no way for anybody to even interact with that, and you're telling me that was a big part of the story? So, yeah, you do have to be a little careful of that. Now, it's possible, like your apocalypse idea, and of course, we were talking about managing the Maelstrom, right? It's possible that at the session 0, you may say, listen, the world's going to be destroyed. It's going to die. Like, the whole point of this game is the death and destruction of this world. Like, volcanoes are going to erupt, world destroying storms are going to sweep through, a comet's going to hit, the zombie apocalypse is coming, the netherworlds are going to open up portals and ravage the world. One of the gods are going to come down from the skies and sit upon a throne carved from the mountainside and take over. Like, you could literally say, listen, this is just a countdown to it's the final countdown, right? And the game may just be the players trying to survive long enough before the apocalypse happens. So it's not necessary that the players have to be able to stop everything that's happening, but you do want to let them know, foreshadow the events are going to happen, rather than going, ha, you didn't see it coming. And it's like, yeah, because we never you'd never put it in our face for us to see it. Um, Vince says, I never tell my players what they may have achieved. It is far more fun to go with the chaos and never know yourself what would have happened. Use what they give you, play to find out what happens. And man, that could be a whole thing unto itself. To play the difference between play to find out what happens versus the foreshadowing of this will happen and playing. I'm not describing it correctly. That's forget what I said. I know what I mean. I'm going to distract myself. So, court reporter, please just disregard that. Vince says, I actually did something like this once when I was a newer GM. Had to cancel the campaign afterwards. Yeah, we all do things like that. Sorry about the brightness of the light. It's gonna. Damn it. Anyway, another thing also as to like forward your world and whatnot is kind of do a wrap up at the end of the game. And during a wrap up at the end of the game, you could actually find little bits and nuggets about what the players want to do, what their motivations are moving forward. Maybe they've gotten a lot of money, they want to spend some money or construct some device or make a connection to get a starship or study magic or make a connection to their paladin order or whatnot, and then use those little elements too. Hey, what do you guys are going to be on a three-week trip, or you've come back home, and maybe one player's like, I want to reconnect with my family. Another player's like, I'm going to find out more about this plot to assassinate the king or something, and then use a lot of that information as well. Again, taking the pressure off of the back of the GM, you as the GM, and going, you know what? I'm just going to put everything, their interest, what are they interested in? And then putting the obstacles in front of what they're interested in getting. Because that's essentially what it is, right? In every story, the protagonist needs to get from A to B, and then there's a bunch of obstacles in their way to get from A to B. And that's essentially what your gaming world is. And then just being prepared, like Undo talked about consistency, and just being consistent about, okay, well, let's see, we have these particular gears are moving in this direction. Players threw a monkey wrench into those gears. How do we get those gears moving again? And that's where the big bad evil guy comes in. Hey, I want to take over the West. What, they're adventurers trying to stop me? I won't be able to take over the West now. I'm going to have to change my plan slightly and stop them. Vince says, we cancel a lot of campaigns with that group. We switch GMs almost every time and started more than a dozen games. I learned mostly how to make characters with that group. Yeah, that if we had a dumping ground for the number of fits and starts we've had with when it comes to gaming, oh man, that would fill a billion universes if we could do that. Yeah, Plura says, yeah, I've had some of those, but it's a learning opportunity. Cole's the weak GMs. Ooh, that's brutal, dude. That is very brutal. So, okay, so managing the Maelstrom, okay, handling the chaos at your game. So let's, yeah, exactly. Oh man, you're so right. Yeah, you learn more from failures than successes. There are actually mechanical ways that players learn from their failures. I believe it's like, I want to say Call of Cthulhu. There's other games where you actually get skill points, or you get the opportunity for skill improvement every time you fail. So let's get down to the nitty gritty of like combat, where you have a very complicated combat. For me, I love complicated monsters like BFF creatures. For example, the other week talked about wetlands when I was on vacation and on holiday. And during the wetlands conversation, let's say you have undead horde, walking through the muck and mire of a swamp or a bog or something, and they're covered in, I don't know, moss and vines, and maybe invaded with hives of insects or snakes or something. And maybe there's like carrion birds, like vultures or something, circling overhead, maybe ravens or something circling overhead that are angry and feeding on the undead horde that's marching through the swamp as well. And of course, PCs. Vince says, yeah, in Dungeon World you gain XP when you roll a complete failure too. Pelora changed the name, so going by a different handle at the moment. So yeah, so the sometimes I get why, but sometimes it can be a little bit distracting for some GMs when they have too many moving parts. You guys know me. I'm the self-appointed third pillar-ist. I love having the environment move in weird and strange and chaotic and random methods as well. And it can be a lot to handle. So one thing is, if some players are not involved in it, throw some of that information over to some of those players. So for example, the party is split and you have some kind of maybe mindless creatures or animal creatures. Let them run some of them. Let the players who aren't involved in it at the moment run some of the zombies, or one player runs the flock of ravens that's circling overhead, and another player handles the insect swarm that's buzzing around the zombies, and maybe let some people who aren't involved in it do that. Another thing to do is to do a summary of what just happened. And I don't mean a long dissertation on everybody's actions, right? But to do a little summary, right? As though as a GM, you go, okay, all right, so let's see. The wizard cast a spell and burned one of the zombies. All right, 3 of them falling to the ground, smoldering in the swampy waters. And the barbarian sliced the head off of 2 of the zombies, but the zombie horde is ignoring it. They're just walking over the dead, their own dead as they come towards you. The insect swarm, flowing around you. The druid is behind the party, trying to communicate with the ravens and at least get them to, if not stop attacking the party, maybe get control of them. Like, do a little bit of a summary of everyone's actions to keep everyone on the same page, especially if you have players that are very nose and navelers, top-headed, where they're always looking down. They're always on their phone or something like that, and they're looking down, and they're just waiting for their turn, not involving themselves in what the ramifications of what everyone else is doing. If you get in the habit of doing like a little bit of a summary, like a one-liners. The fighter took out 3 zombies. There's 13 left behind them. The wizard burned another 3 zombies and their bodies are smoldering. The druid is standing behind the party, hoping to be in a safe location. Eyes roll to the back of the head. You see the flock of ravens starting to twist and turn and focus on the druid or something, right? Maybe there's other things going on. The bandits are still holding the captives hostage, but they are brandishing their weapons at the throat of the hostages, or the floodwaters are starting to rise even further, and a few of the village homes are literally starting to lift off their foundation. Like to kind of summarize a little bit of what's going on, keep the players involved, and that way you're never losing track of, like, instead of like little things that are happening individually that are having no impact on each other. If you do the summary, it allows the players to maybe feed off of and stack on top of whatever else is going on, right? Vince says, good advice. Players always ask how the situation is, especially in Theater of the Mind games. Yeah, in Theater of the Mind, you can really start to lose track of what the hell's going on. And I feel like if you as the game master start to summarize just a little bit, all right, so in summary, you cast a spell, burning, you sliced up the zombies, you are sitting in the back trying to keep yourself protected. Oh, and by the way, the travelers that were coming through this place are huddled in the corner next to a tree, but they're being surrounded by these fungus-covered zombies and whatnot. Like, by summarizing that, maybe your players will start to do the same thing. And maybe they will then take advantage of the setting itself. Oh, the zombies are burning. Can I light one of my arrows on fire and then use it? The innocent people are being surrounded by the zombies. I forgot about them. Is it possible for me to use a mirror image and cast it on them instead of myself to protect them? Or I'm the cleric. I want to run over there and use a section and cover them with my body and the lost children or something, and use a sanctuary spell so that the zombies go a different method. Can I do that? Like, so in other words, letting the players feed off of one another and then use that as a not defensive measure, but use that as a environmental measure to then continue on what's going on. And maybe even yourself or some of the other players go, oh, I didn't think about that. That's right. You did use a burning hand spell on them. Maybe if they're burning, their bodies are burning, maybe I could light a torch or something, or spill oil. Hey, can I use my grease spell in front of us and have it catch on fire, and then maybe kind of make like a haphazard wall of flames or something, and then allow that to grow on its own. Plura says, I must say my weakness as a GM is combat. I don't run that much combat, but I think it should be better when I do. Having no information about that, P, I must say that most of us are pretty horrible to ourselves. Like, we're like, oh, that sucked. I wish I was better. If people are still coming back to the table, they still want to game with you. I wouldn't make yourself too harsh, but we can always be better. Maybe that's the horrible part of being an artist in a creator, is we're never finished. We always want to get better. So I guess I have to. I guess I was trying to chastise you. I guess instead I agree with you. Deadman says in MechWarrior 3rd edition, you got reduced costs to advance a skill with a failure. Yeah, there's. I like the idea of growing with failure. That people learn more through their failures than not more, but people tend to learn a lot through failure than success. As a kid, the first time you burned your hand on the stove taught you a whole hell of a lot about what stoves do and what fire or heat it has on the human body, right? There's all kinds of things that we do in life. Putting your hand in the mouth of a dog that's barking at you is pretty stupid too, or licking a toilet seat, or maybe I'm talking about my own life, but you get my point, right? Your failures, your poking the bear situations tend to teach you a lot more than or teach you just as much, if not more, than our successes. So I definitely agree that. Now, what's weird about that is what ends up happening sometimes in those gaming systems, as opposed to real life, is that the barbarian starts to get smarter because there's nowhere to go but up, whereas their combat abilities tend to plateau a little bit in those kind of games. So having like a balance of, I get to spend points where I want to, and I also get to improve on my weaker things because of failures, is a good thing. I'm not really a fan of one or the other. I like a little mix of both of them. Vince says, my weak points are currently making interesting NPCs. I'm more obsessed with story and events than making multi-layer interesting NPCs. That's weird too, because I'm the same way. I'm more about the bigger story than the NPCs. And one of the guys I game with, Rob, that's part of a Critical Hit, he's an NPC master. He just on the fly, he can come up with some very, very interesting stories. He's very good at mixing like suspicious NPCs without them being villains, and I have a hard time doing that. It says GMs are their own worst critics, but I think it's a necessary evil. You would be super duper boring if that wouldn't be the case. I'm very sure about that. Plura says, yeah, I'm a musician too. I'm used to it. Not bumming myself out, just something to work on. Yeah, exactly. So anyway, we're coming upon the hour mark, so we're going to wind it down a little bit. Another thing too is that if you're using, say, miniatures, or you're physically in front of people, you could use like 3x5 cards or notes or post-it notes or something to basically slip some notes under maybe some figures, or if you're using that, or writing some things at the table just to keep track of what's going on. With theater of the mind, especially if you're playing online, maybe have like a chat open, or Discord, or or something of that nature, where like I believe still available in Hangouts, there's a chat board on the side, and you could post the chat board on the side and just use the slider to move up and down and go, wait a minute, a couple rounds, didn't you cast a spell? And then use the slider and move up and down and go, oh, that's right. Yeah, that's okay. So you do have this protection spell that, protection from good and evil up around the party, and it's still going to last for another couple of rounds or minutes or whatever, right? So that's a possibility too. Like, it's weird to sometimes we try to mimic the table setting too much and forget that the meta part of the gaming thing isn't evil. It's just a thing. I never saw the game, but I once heard of someone using everyone had their okay. In Facebook, you can set up a message and link everybody with the message, and they were playing online using their phones to send each other messages, and they could reference the messages themselves so that they could go back and figure out what everyone is doing and that kind of thing. And I always thought that playing in a sci-fi game, especially online, that it would be kind of cool to say, okay, everybody, bring your cell phone to the game, and we are going to use our cell phones at the game. And, even using our Cortanas or Googles or whatever, Alexis's and stuff like that, right? Like, and actually use them in game and send each other messages in game. And when your phone goes off or pings, it's literally an in-game thing. So that's a possibility too. Like to not fight the meta part of it and just have people saying, hey, listen, what did you do last round? I wrote the notes down. Oh, there's burning bodies, and oh, there's a flock of ravens going after the druid that failed the roll, and there's the barbarian still trying to hack at the zombies that are exploding into swarms of insects or something, right? And then going, yeah, that's right, the swarms of insects, I forgot about that. And lastly, you might even want to give an in-game benefit to some of the players that are helping you out. Taking 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, there's inspiration. You could say as a GM, listen, I can't keep track of all this, guys. Can you help me out? If you help me keep track, I'll award you inspiration, right? You could go so far as to do that. Or listen, I'm just grab a D6, and for any roll you make, I don't care whether it's damage, a saving throw, an attack roll, a skill roll, I don't care. For helping me out, guys, grab a D6. You get to add that D6 to any one action. A damage, I don't care. Just and is it going to break a game doing something like that? No, especially if everyone's agreed to it. At your own table, you can do whatever the hell you want to. Vince says, Vince says, my players mostly like fun hirelings I made. They once had a talking severed head. The idea was stolen from Monkey Island, but it was so fun playing them. And I once played the mother of one of the PCs in a really cliched way, and this was super fun too. That's awesome too. I like characters with families. A severed head that talks to them. That's a little bizarre. I like it. I like it a lot. Vince says, quote, you never come to visit, always leaving your poor mother here, going on adventures. You're just like your dad. Yeah, right. Plura says, I give XP for doing stuff. I give 1 to whoever recaps the last session, for example. Yeah, and it sounds kind of a little bit, I don't know, is the word corny? A little too, what's I've heard referred to as over meta, like giving experience points for players that bring snacks, or players that do a recap, or players that write down, that do a living diary, or players that draw art or find art, or a player that draws a map or something like that. But why the hell not? Vince says, this never works with my players. Yeah, but yeah, Pelora goes on to say, lets me see where they're focused and gives me some extra time to settle. You know what? And I feel like there's no reason to not do that, right? Yes, in game, your player may not be performing these actions, but out of game, why not reward that? Hey guys, I couldn't be in this game, but I listened or watched online from the game you guys had last time, and I made a diary. Great. your character now has extra experience points, so you can keep up with everyone else. Like that might be the only way for people to participate. And role playing wise, we're not the most socially adept individuals in the world, so the wallflower player might be better served doing something in the background, making maps, keeping notes, painting figures and stuff, and rewarding them for just doing that. Keeps them in the game because maybe you really want them in the game, but they just haven't, come out of their shell, or maybe they're awkward, or listen, we have people who are come in all shapes and sizes, and if someone is I don't know, I don't want to pick on this, but if maybe somebody has a tinge of like Asperger's or something, and you're like, listen, I don't want you to feel awkward at my table, but I want you to participate, and if this is better for you, more power to you, man. Or young lady, let this be your way of contributing. So yeah. So guys, everybody have a great one. Everyone have a great day. I will see thee tomorrow in World Building Wednesday. We will continue our talk with Maelstroms. Everyone have a great one. See ya. Bye.